Hey there, everybody. Welcome to episode number 21 of the greatest podcast to ever tickle your eardrums. The podcast that will sprite your creativity and make you a better person. This is What's on Your Workbench. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to What's on Your Workbench. I can't promise we're going to make you a better person, but maybe you'll at least feel better after hearing the stuff that we've screwed up. I am Chili from Orwood Solutions-ish in time of transition, but with me always is my steady rock, Andrew from Australia, from Crafty Beetroot. Andrew, how are you doing today?
I am doing good. Nothing like setting the standards high.
You gotta have something to shoot for.
always. That's how I live my life. If I'm meeting goals, I need to set harder goals. It's just not. It's how it's meant to be. It's you can't just settle. Can't just settle.
No, can't settle. Settling's for suckers.
Yeah.
So, what you been up to lately, buddy?
Been busy. I think last week I mentioned it, but it's been my wife's birthday, and I think I've found my limits of what I really should be attempting to do in the lead up to things like that. I used to always be like, oh, I've got time. I've got endless time. I can work on stuff. And yeah, it was down to the wire. My wife was like, my son had soccer practice, and she was like, oh, like, do you want me to take him? I'm like, yeah, I kind of need you to take him on your birthday so that I've got time to, make your card and finish and wrap the presents. And so it was down to the wire, but we got it done. And she was very happy. So it worked out quite well. How about yourself? How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Just trucking along at what's next.
Nice.
Good stuff. So speaking of Miriam's birthday, I am assuming that that's some of what we're going to talk about today. So yes. I think we may as well just jump right in.
Yep, let's do it.
Tell me, Andrew, what has been on your workbench?
Well, let me show you my workbench. It is just a complete mess of stuff.
There's a workbench there?
Yeah, it's underneath the layer of stuff.
I'll take your word.
Which is underneath the layer of stuff, which is underneath another layer of stuff. That's kind of my reward this weekend, is when I actually can sit down and reorganize it. But yeah, so for my wife's birthday, I've been busily beavering away on a few different things, and I was going to talk about one thing that I made, and I realized it was just a painted box, and I was like, it's kind of not really that interesting. So I actually want to talk about the cake. So over the last, I think it's 3 or 4 weeks, I haven't been working at my workbench. That's why it can look the way it looks. And I've been working on the dining room table for a cake. Now I've got a piece of it left. For those of you that are on YouTube, you can see it. And I will try and describe it. And it's basically a fondant tree, dead tree, about 4 inches tall. And it's got a little swing on it that has licorice for the rope. And that was part of the tree topper that I did for my wife's birthday cake. So I don't have a lot of experience with fondant. And so normally for my wife's birthday, I focus more on the cake itself, trying different aspects of what I can do with a cake. Like last year I made a jelly one, those clear jelly ones where you put mushrooms and stuff in it. If normal people probably don't know, but yeah, it's a thing you can do. It's really cool. And that one stressed me out to no end. So I decided to, let's try something completely different. And I wanted to really mess around with fondant. And growing up, that was something my mother did a lot of. She did some courses, and then she basically did every relative that I know wedding cake. She did our wedding cake for me and my wife, and did the roses and did everything. So I'd grown up around fondant, but I'd never actually done much with it myself. And my wife has kind of gone down that route now as well. She does quite a bit of cake decorating, at least for the kids. So yeah, I wanted to push myself. So I said, what is the easiest thing to make out of fondant? You know what I came up with? I think making a bicycle would be the easiest thing to make out of fondant. I was incorrect. Turns out a bicycle is almost the most difficult thing to make out of fondant. And I actually ended up failing. Doing spokes on a wheel turns out really, really difficult. I did have some wheels, but I didn't have the frame, the right proportions. And so I ended up getting rid of that. And so what I ended up doing was I ended up doing a fairly basic scene. So it was just meant to be kind of like a park scene with a park bench made out of fondant, and then this tree with the swing on it. And then I did like a rock path. And yeah, so that was what I was doing, my first kind of foray into actually working with fondant and doing kind of sculpting at all. I'm definitely not a sculptor. I've done a little bit of work with clay here and there, but definitely not something I enjoy doing, something I look to do. But yeah, it was definitely fun pushing myself. But the thing with fondant is you never know when it's going to, like, humidity or something's going to just make it wilt. And we live in a fairly warm, humid climate, but at this time of the year, it's not too bad. It's fairly dry. So you do fondant, and in the back of your mind, oh, I made the park bench, and then you wake up the next morning and the whole thing's wilted. So you kind of do all the prep work. So you make all this stuff, like I'd have the tree lying down, ready to go. And then the night before, once it's all kind of hopefully hardened up, you stand it up, put it all together, and put it all out and hope that it lasts the day. And, I think I was being a bit paranoid in the end. I probably could have been working on this a week prior and put it all together and it would have been fine. But again, not something I'm that familiar with in this climate. I'm not that familiar with. So it was a bit of a last minute, put it all together. And then, yeah, the bike didn't work, but that was all right. But the rest of it all came together. So yeah, I do have to admit though, my brilliance of using the licorice for the ropes on the swing, that so good. And I bought 2 meters of licorice and I only needed like the tiniest little bit. So I got to eat the rest, which is always good. Priorities, people.
Yeah, that's the licorice ropes really worked well. Like, I love how flexible it is and that it genuinely swings. That's awesome.
Yeah. It's got fun.
So I'm wondering, I know that you have a tendency to eventually revisit things that didn't work the way you want them to. So if you were to revisit the bicycle, how do you think you would go about that?
I would buy a model one and I would put it on the bike. There is a limit to fondant. And I think if you want something, it's going to be that balance. You can do it, but you're going to have chunky spokes for starters. If you're okay with that, if you're doing like a BMX kind of bike, something of that nature, you could do it and I think it would look good. If you're doing for more like a road bike with nice fine spokes, that's really your difficult point. What I tried to do was make what's called royal icing, which is egg whites mixed with icing sugar, and you whip that up and it goes really, really hard and brittle. And so I actually tried to get a really fine nozzle and basically draw lines out to a circle that I'd made. And that worked okay, but I have a really shaky hand, so my spokes weren't really that fine. And then what I did is you can buy spray paint basically for icing. And it was actually from the last time we were in Colorado. We actually had that for my son's birthday. So that's about 3 years old. Anyway, yeah, and you can just spray it. So what I did is I made the wheels. I kind of got I think it was like the top of a jar or glass, and I shaped like basically a sausage and I wrapped it around, and that became my base for my hub. And then I used the this fine nozzle, and I basically used this royal icing to basically crisscross. And then if you let that sit, and then you can pop it off, and it's strong enough to hold it. Obviously, once you start manipulating it, it's fairly easy to just crack that. And then I put a black, then I rolled out some black fondant, nice and thin, and used that to be the tire. And so at that point, I was fairly happy I could get it to work. It wouldn't be perfect, but you could recognize it as a bike. But what I had done because I printed off a picture of a bike that I wanted to copy, and I made the frame match the picture, but I didn't quite reference the wheels properly. I made the wheels too big. So the frame to the wheel ratio was just not working. And so I would have had to have like extended things with soft fondant versus the hard fondant that I'd done, a week ago or 2 weeks ago and let harden. And so it just was, at that point, I was like, I could sit here and try and make it work, and it's probably still not likely to work. So I was just like, I'll just get rid of it. And when I actually made the cake was almost too small anyway, and it would have actually almost been too much on the cake. So I would have had to have got rid of something anyway. But yeah, no, it was, if I was going to do it again and I wanted that particular bike, because what I was trying to do was replicate my wife's actual bike. And that's kind of one of those old style riding bikes. It's not like a modern mountain bike or anything. So if I was going to do it again, what I'd do is I'd go and buy an actual proper model that actually looks the real part, and then just put that on the cake, which is the cheap's way of doing it. But sometimes you've got to know the limits of your materials, and yeah, that was one of those things.
Well, I think limits of materials is an important thing to bring up there. And mind you, I am not a baker at all. I hate baking. I love to eat it, but I don't do it. That being said, I have watched a fair amount of cooking shows. My wife loves to bake. My sister is like bananas about it. And so I was kind of like one of the things I've seen done before that I think would maybe be a good application for this is using, I believe it's called sucralose, crystalline sugar.
Yep.
That you can tint, and it's kind of like, an icing initially, like kind of like you were piping out the royal icing. It's similar to that. And what I've seen people do is you take like a parchment paper and you lay it down over a drawing. Or you could even use a picture of your wife's bike, because you can see the picture through the parchment, or rice paper, I think is actually what they use. And then you take the sucralose and you can pipe it out over the picture using it as a template, to get, and it's nice because it's much more rigid than any other icing, like even royal icing. It's hard sugar when it dries. I think like that would be really good for the frame of the bike, and you could even integrate just the wheels right into it, because you could overlap the frame onto the wheels, so you'd have the right depth perception, and structurally it would be stronger. I do still like that idea though of if possible using that fondant to make the tires themselves. Like, I just feel like that would be a real good texture.
So, I mean, the frame, doing it the way I did, I mean, I'm not good at making cylinders. Like if you've got a technique to make cylinders nice and smooth, the fondant works really well for the frame because you can get that 3-dimension. What I did have the idea of was trying to pull kind of like a toffee or a lolly or a candy spokes. And so I was hoping to, like, if I got the right temperature mix on making the sugar, water, whatever, I could kind of dip a fork in and pull it. And as it cooled, I would get like these nice, cool, like basically, cylinders of like almost glass. And then I could kind of cut them to the right size and put that in.
Similar to pulling cane.
Pulling
glass work.
Yeah, exactly. But then again, you've got to have a lot, and then there's a lot of issues as well, because if you don't get it the right temperature, it's going to be sticky and it's going to bend. And I mean, obviously this is way beyond my normal skill set. So I did mess around with that a little bit. I got a little bit of success, but I couldn't get enough to make it worthwhile. Just because it would have been easier then to have those kind of lack of a better term, bars that I could then place and then put a bob of fondant on there. And then when the fondant dries, because the nice thing about fondant is that if you do have time, you can do the fondant, let it sit, and it'll come really hard. But yeah, it was funny because I had all these pieces, and then it just was like too many things.
Yeah,
but
that's an intense project.
Yeah.
On top of all the other stuff you were trying to do.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing is because my family have quite a few allergies, gluten-free, dairy-free, egg-free. I couldn't just kind of throw together a cake. I ended up doing like a Rice Krispie cake because what I wanted to do was make, the rage well, probably not the rage now, but the rage a few years ago was what they call like the naked cake, where you see the actual baked cake. And what I wanted to do was basically do a fake naked cake where I took a brownie and I coated the Rice Krispie in brownie so it looked like I'd somehow made this wonderful, high-standing, fluffy, chocolate cake, which is almost impossible in a gluten-free cake. Gluten-free cake you can make like moist and you can make nice, but it'll start to like basically compress in on itself and it becomes really like, my wife uses the term stodgy. I don't know if that's the correct term, but it's as good a term as any. And so every cake that we've made for my daughter or my wife, whatever, you end up having, it's okay for like a day or two, but then you end up just kind of having to throw it away. It's just no good. So I wanted to avoid that. So that's why I came up with this idea of the Rice Krispie. And then the idea was I'll make the outside of it all this kind of like, it'll be brownie. And then I kind of had the fun idea because like, how in a cartoon, whenever you like see go underground, they always have like random dinosaur bones and like a treasure chest. And as you go down deeper, there's always kind of like, stuff. So that's what I did is I actually put some holes in the side of the cake and I put some like dinosaur skeletons in there. And I was going to have a treasure chest, but that kind of fell apart when I was trying to put it in, just to kind of have a bit of fun. But then it would also kind of be a bit of a, mess with your mind, especially like my wife would look and be like, well, how's that all brownie and how's that all like gluten-free? But then when you cut into it, it's got like this Rice Krispie in it. And I ended up adding glacé cherries, like a dried cherry, to the Rice Krispie, and it just made it have this like nice cherry flavor to it as well. So it was, nice. Overall, the end product was really good. Because the whole idea behind the bike was a lot of the birthday presents I got for my wife were bike related. And so what I wanted to do was have this bike sitting there. And so she looked at it and was like, that looks like my bike, but my bike doesn't have a basket, or my bike doesn't have that box on the back. Why is that on that bike? And then when she, gets to her presents, there's her bike with these, presents on her bike. So that was the overall vision, but we didn't quite get there. But if you didn't know that was a vision, everybody seemed to be pretty happy with the cake. So I guess it's one of those things where what you don't know, it's like that's what I intended. It's what I intended. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. That's ultimately the proof is in the pudding for the cake in this instance. And as long as the cake tasted good and everybody enjoyed it, that's what really matters.
Well, as long as you can get one good picture, that's all you need. Because once it's eaten, you'll never see it again. So you just need one good picture, and then that becomes what the cake was. So that's always what it's all about. It's all about getting a good picture of it.
Nice.
But that's enough about me. And I am now done with cake decorating for at least another year until I come up with my next crazy plan. What has been on your workbench, Chili?
I will leave it up to you to see what you want to discuss. Because I've been doing a couple of things. One is getting stuff ready, continuing to get stuff ready for this Holy Grail project, which included this week putting a radio in the Chevelle. Nice. And then downstairs in the shop, I did a little bit of furniture repair on an old piece of family furniture that I have inherited, so that it can be taken out of the garage and put in the house like it should be.
Well, let's do the furniture restoration. Always love me some furniture restoration.
So I had intended to really go pretty bananas with this and strip it all down. It's a buffet.
Okay, yeah, I think we've talked a little bit about it.
That I have a kitchen table that matches it, but I was talking about kind of stripping it all down and refinishing it to match the dining room table I've done. I didn't really know where I was going to put it in our dining room, though. We didn't really have a good space for it. And I looked at it and just said, I don't want to strip this. I just have zero desire to take off years of random finishes that my grandpa has jerry-rigged onto this. Like, I don't want to do it.
Has it got paint on it, or is it like a varnish and stain and stuff you'd be taking off?
You know, there's probably some varnish, there's probably some urethane, there's God only knows what, like, my grandpa taught me a lot of my metalwork stuff. But it really was not a good idea to let him around fine woodworking. some real slapdash repairs. I'm pretty sure he's the one who spray painted the back of it. Nice. So that gives you an idea. But so what I had to do was, there were some structural things that needed love. Two of the drawers, the dovetails were loose and separating. One of the bottom drawer, the bottom piece in it is like had a gap like that big, this massive crack that had opened up. And so my grandpa just like stuck a piece of wood, you know, parallel across it. Like, there we go. Now it's all together. And one of the bottom legs, which has a caster inserted in the bottom of it, a small brass caster, had split.
Okay. Yeah.
So there was a wedge kind of out of it, which went from the middle of the bottom out to a side. And it had been obviously glued at one point, but not well. When you looked at both sides of the break, you could see glue that was still like in light. It was just like lightly squeezed droplets.
Yeah.
So that means it didn't get a good bond. So there was some work to do there. And as always, I had no idea what materials were used on this in previous repairs. So I kind of go through a bit of a methodical process in taking stuff apart. So the same process applied to the dovetail joinery on the top drawers, and the joinery on the bottom drawer, and this previous repair on the leg, to find out what material was used to glue them back together. I know that from the periods that it was built and work was probably done on it, the highest likelihood was that the glue was either liquid hide glue, which is made literally from animal hides.
Yep.
Or it was a PVA wood glue, which has been around for quite a while as well. So what I do is I test to see if any of it's animal hide glue first. And the way to do that is that animal hide glue will come apart with warm water. It's really sturdy glue when it's set. It works really well, but it's really awesome that you actually can remove it pretty easily with warm water. So I took one of the joints that was most open on a drawer, and I took the two pieces of the leg, and I put some warm water on them just to see, does this glue soften up at all? And none of it softened. So I had a pretty good feeling that everything that's on here from original construction and repairs is probably PVA wood glue.
Yeah.
So with that, what takes PVA off is rubbing alcohol.
Okay.
So I grabbed a 90% alcohol, and took those same pieces that I had tried the water on and soaked them a little bit with some rubbing alcohol, just isopropyl alcohol. And sure enough, that glue started to loosen up, gets a little bit malleable. So I had my answer. So that's what I applied to all of my joinery that needed to come apart, as well as the glue that was on those two surfaces of the leg. That takes a lot of time and patience. um, and the reason you really want to do that and get all that remnant off is so that you go back to having tight fitting joints. And that's that's fairly easy on the joinery because you're working on milled surfaces. So getting that glue off is fairly easy. But on the broken leg, that's really tricky because you have kind of jagged, rough pieces where the wood has split along the grain.
Yep.
And you don't want to lose that. You want to keep as much of the detail in that grain structure as you can, because that helps realign that joint again and helps you get a really good, snug, nearly invisible fit. So the joinery on the drawers, soak it, scrape it, we're good. That came apart, put it all back together, replace the piece in the bottom drawer. That was all fine. The leg was another story. That was about 8 hours
Wow.
of carefully applying alcohol, getting things to the right, level of tackiness, and then picking glue off using dental picks.
Oh.
Yeah. It was really a good thing that it wasn't done well, because those kind of globs of glue left in there help give you something to get a hold of, and you can really peel stuff off.
Yep.
So I got all that stripped back, put fresh glue on, and clamped it properly this time so that it actually has a really good solid joint. Got it all back together and hauled that big old turd inside.
So did you end up doing a new finish on it at all, or?
No, I didn't, because the finish itself is actually in pretty good shape.
Okay.
So I just used some paste wax.
Okay. Yep.
And some 4/0 steel wool and scrubbed it up to get it nice and clean. It's got a great sheen to it now, and that the paste wax not only helps clean but also adds a layer of protection as well.
Yep.
So once I do it with the 4/0 and get it kind of wiped off with a clean rag, then I go back over it with a clean rag, or
Yep.
you can do it with clean wool too if you want a more matte finish, and go over, apply your wax, buff it off. So it actually looks pretty dang good. There's still one thing that I may do on it. It just depends on how ambitious I get, because this is around turn of the century.
You're definitely not talking to anybody ambitious over on this side.
This thing is around turn of the century is when it was built. It is a hand-built piece.
And for the record, that's 120 years ago, not 20 years ago, everybody.
Yeah. Sorry, turn of the 20th century. So it is a hand-built piece, but it does utilize manufactured woods, laminate products.
Okay.
Which helps. That's what kind of helps you age things, looking at joinery methods as well as materials. So it has an original mirror in it on the back, that it comes above the counter height. That has an old mirror in it, and it is the original mirror. And so the way mirrors were made at that time was that you silvered the back of the mirror, and that is a chemical process, that you wash the backside of the mirror in a certain solution. Then the second solution, which the first solution is actually copper, is what it lays down. The second solution reacts with that and lays down silver on the back of the mirror.
That's silver nitrate process, is that what it is? Yeah. On chemistry, I remember.
Yeah, it's a pretty intense process. It's not terribly easy to do really well. You can get it half-assed, anybody can, but to do it really well, it's pretty tricky. And it's pretty noxious. You're
Yeah.
using some nasty chemicals to get this done. And then once that's down, you lay down a black coating on the very, on the very top.
Yeah.
And that helps reflect everything back out and gives you a really nice mirror. But in order to do that properly, I actually have to strip the entire back of the mirror and do it all again. I have seen some people patch mirrors, old mirrors,
Okay.
by kind of removing some material, then laying down new silver over just that spot. It's not recommended to do that because you'll have some flaking issues with time. And yeah, so if I did it, I would really want to do it right and strip the whole thing back to bare glass and redo it again.
Is there any benefit to doing that, or are you better off just buying a new piece of glass and starting from that? Or is
For this piece of furniture, in all honesty, it wouldn't really matter to just even to buy a modern mirror to put in it. Like, not a big deal, or have one made, whatever. It really wouldn't be a big deal. When it comes to antique furniture, though, usually what most people will tell you is don't even touch the mirror.
Don't even touch it.
That original mirror is one of the most priceless parts of the piece, and a lot of people want that originality. It's okay if there's some some
Black
scuffs or
spots,
some spots where it's worn through, like, that's fine. It's better to have that. It's only really when you see really high-end restoration done on pieces that you see people actually stripping the original glass and remirroring it with this original technique. And that's the hard part about furniture restoration. And it's similar with cars too. There are differing tastes as to what people like to see, but generally, if you're going to go with a full-blown restoration, what gets scrutinized is that not only is the quality of work there, but the work was done in a manner consistent with the original construction. So that's like in cars, that's when you talk about concourse restorations. And that's like, people are down to, on some vehicles, like looking at what the factory overspray patterns were. And recreating overspray on the bottom of the car. It is bananas, the details that people, I mean, it's just like people who do prop recreation. And these people get insanely deep into every tiny detail, and when you're judged at a concourse event, those judges know everything, and they look at everything. I mean, if you have the wrong head on a fastener in the wheel well, they'll find it.
I couldn't have the most I have the most respect for those people, but I am not in that world. and it's for me, because a lot of those antique people, almost, they'll always say, don't touch it, don't touch it, don't touch it. Like, and it's like, well, if it's going to be a functional piece, are you better off having this thing that's sitting in the corner that looks like a piece of junk, for lack of a better term, that's worth more, or to have a functional piece? And in my mind, I would prefer somebody to almost, I mean, obviously there's always going to be a line that you don't want to cross, like 400 old handcrafted beautiful piece. Don't touch it, it's fine. But something like you said, 100 years old, 50 years old, that you need to use every day, get it usable. Try and do the best you can, but get it usable. I mean, there's got to be a line where it's just like, and like, my parents have a similar issue where they've got a mirror that they've had, and it's starting to go, the black spots kind of coming through, and it's it's like, what do you do? Do you leave it? Like, and I guess for me, it would come down to, is it a mirror that you need to use? If it's not, leave it. If it's a mirror you need to use and you can afford to do it properly, do it properly. If it's one that you need to use and you can't afford to do it properly, just replace it with a new one. And that becomes part of the history, because we've talked about it before at length. It's like, if you look at a house or that's been rebuilt over 300 years ago or 500 years ago, we look at it now and the change that they did 200 years ago is part of the, oh yeah, that's just part of what happens. But back then they would be like, oh, don't change it, don't change it. So it all just kind of adds to the story and adds to the time. I mean, I still prefer it to, whatever's happening, as long as it's not getting thrown out or, just living in a storage cupboard somewhere, I think that's the best outcome for that piece of furniture.
Yeah.
Anything really.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it does, what its purpose is currently is a big part of that. It, in the car world, we have, drivers, and we have what are sometimes affectionately, sometimes in a derogatory way, referred to as trailer queens.
Yeah.
Meaning they never drive. They just go on the trailer, get taken to a show, and come off the trailer. I'm not a big proponent of trailer queens, whether it be in cars or furniture. These are things that were in their infancy, they were designed and built for use. And I think that they should carry on that use. I think there are some rare examples of things that probably should be preserved for a museum. It's only through those things that we're able to rediscover things we've lost.
Yeah.
So there is a catalog of those things that are important to have.
Yeah, an original example
that way.
And it basically, and I think you're starting to go either original examples or pieces of artwork. At that point is really what you're talking about. You're not, at that point, it's no longer a car. It's either it's a piece of artwork and it's displaying the skills of the artist. And they can call it whatever they want, but effectively that's what they're doing. And by rights, they can do that. Or it's that first example of, this is the original whatever, and we need to preserve this in this form, because otherwise we'll never understand how we got from A to B or A to Z if we didn't know where B, C, and D are. And that's where those records of let's just keep it, don't touch it. And it's super fascinating, because I've been watching a lot of firearm videos, and you see these, I can't believe some of these examples exist where it's like, oh yeah, this was the 5th prototype along, and there's probably only 2 of these in the world, and this one collector just decided to, oh, that's kind of interesting, I'll buy it, put it in his attic and forgot about it, and then got rediscovered, and now it's that pivotal piece that explains how this evolution of these rifles came to be. And again, they would be guns that are never fired, they just sit, and it's like, yep, that's fine, because that's that catalog that we do need to have. Furniture, especially handmade furniture, it's so much more difficult. It's kind of more like fashion, where there wasn't a mechanical approach. This dress or this piece of furniture didn't change world history like a rifle might, and that individual piece is different to the manufacturing process, kind of like we were talking about last week, where it's these cars represent a manufacturing process or a time in history rather than an individual artist might, like with a furniture maker or fashion or something like that.
Yeah, I think that where it gets real interesting too is for example, the Eames chair. The Eames office chair is an iconic piece of mid-mod furniture. And I mean, the Eames chair is in museums. There was enough of them made, though, that, there are people that just have them and use them. And it is something that I would never in a million years spend the time to repair. really because it's a shit design. Like, it's beautiful. Aesthetically, it's beautiful. As a craftsman, like, you would have a coronary if it came out of your shop because it is so poorly designed for use. They have horrible structural weaknesses. They're garbage. But they represent a massive shift in craft and furniture creation. So I mean, there's examples like that too that you have that are. I really didn't want to use this when it was new.
Yeah.
Why do I want to use it now?
That's when you just hope somebody else has kept a record of and be like, I'll just worry about my little corner of the world. It's important to somebody else, we'll hope. And if it gets lost to history, so be it.
Yeah. Nobody's very concerned, nor will they ever be, about a concourse restoration on a Pinto.
Yeah.
Because it was garbage when it came out.
Yep. It's always funny because people are like, oh, well, maybe the car that I'm driving will one day become one of those. And it's like, no, it won't. Because the cars that become iconic are the ones that were either really good and really rare when they were made, or they're the ones that are they are so iconic because they are the one that everybody drove or everybody had. But then again, the only one that's going to be worth keeping are the ones that are in mint condition from when they were bought, not the one that you drove around for 100 years. And if you happen to have one of those rare cars and then you drove it around for 100 years, yes, then it's worth restoring. But yeah, it's definitely one of those things where it's like, I look at my dad who's restoring his car, and yes, the car is kind of iconic, but he has the 4-door version, not the 2-door version. He doesn't have the right engine in it. So if you say the name, it's like, oh, that's a cool car. But as soon as you start mentioning, oh, but it's this, suddenly it's like, oh, okay. Yeah. And it's like, well, it's still cool, but yeah, it's definitely one of those things.
Yeah. If you have purchased a Challenger Hellcat Red Eye, at some point, that thing's going to be worth some good money.
Yep.
If you just have a Challenger SRT, not really.
Yeah.
just enjoy driving the crap out of it now.
Yep. Enjoy it for what it is. That's my thing, is when people have something and it causes them pain having it and then they don't use it. It's like, why do you have it? If you want it purely for aesthetic reasons or to sit in your garage and just to look at and just to have, then, and that's causing you pleasure, great, all power to you. But if it's like, oh, I don't want to do this because I might scratch it, but I don't really enjoy it, it's like, well, either drive it or get rid of it. Like, it's just not, life's too short to worry about that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, where can people find more of you, Chili?
Probably best to check out Orwood Solutions on Instagram at OrwoodCS, or on YouTube, Orwood Solutions. How about you?
Yep, you can find me at craftybeetroot.com, or on the YouTubes is usually the best spot. There are occasional videos put up, which is getting about that time to try and find something else to put up there. But see if I've got some video I captured, a year ago that I really should edit down, which is probably the case. Actually, there is something I need to work on, but we will worry about that later. And then obviously the podcast you can find on YouTube's at What's on Your Workbench, or on the podcast world on what'sonyourworkbench.podbean.com. And we should be available on any of the regular podcasting apps, iTunes, Spotify, all those good ones. So with that, we will find out next week what's on your workbench.